Well, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. It's been a while since we've been together. We've only got a handful of weeks before kind of the summer break and our meals end, so I decided on Ecclesiastes, but I think we can get through Ecclesiastes in 4 weeks. And we're not going to use it as going in much depth in terms of the background, the biblical history of it. We're going to read it for the practical use that it offers. It offers wisdom for any age, but especially ages where there are a lot of anxieties and worries, and how are we going to deal with life. So I want to begin with what are some of the anxieties and worries that we carry as a culture? What are some worries and anxieties we carry?
I think we're all afraid of this COVID stuff, and I think it just made everybody very anxious.
Yeah, we just had a prayer request. We've been through the season of COVID that lasted a while, and sometimes we forget that it's still out there. And any time that your family gets sick, it's one of those that we kind of still worry about. What are some other things that maybe anxieties, worries we carry as a culture, society?
Job related.
Yeah, job and
Job?
Providing for your family.
Yeah.
I think of all the wars and
Okay.
unrest throughout
Yeah.
the world and even in
Unrest
our
throughout the
backyard.
world. Yeah.
Okay.
I worry about where our society is going since I have young kids that will be going to school,
Okay.
and social media and phones and
Okay.
the damage that does. I
Yeah.
think that lots of parents, I'm not a young parent, but I think some young parents worry about it. I know all the old ones do.
Mm.
So.
Anybody else?
Your children.
Children, we worry about our children. Mm-hmm. Worry about their future. We worry about our future, especially as you get a little older.
Worry about your health.
Worry about health.
issues.
Yeah. When we think about our worries and our anxieties, how do they affect our present?
Our what?
The present.
Oh.
They distract you.
They distract you from the present. What are some other things that they do?
It can hinder your relationship with other people. Keeps
Yeah.
you from maybe building relationships with other people.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, you get turned inward
Yeah.
to just thinking about yourself.
So our worries and anxieties often hinder us from living in the present. It hinders us from focusing on others. A lot of times it creates more of a selfish tendency because our anxiety, our worry becomes the thing that kind of permeates all of what we do. I think sometimes our worry takes away enjoyment. You think about, you're served the best meal you'll ever have, and you can't taste it because you're worried about something else. Most of us have had something like that happen, where you've looked forward to something comes up, and the thing that you look forward to that was supposed to bring you joy now just is tasteless. I think we've all had those experiences. So when we read the book of Ecclesiastes is written very differently from much of the rest of the Old Testament. It is lumped together with Proverbs, parts of the Psalms, the book of Job, and a couple of other places within the Old Testament as part of the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible. And Ecclesiastes, its focus is a lot different than the rest of the Old Testament. The rest of the Old Testament usually focuses on Israel's relationship strictly under Torah law with God. It doesn't talk about a lot of the things we would normally talk about. It talks about everyday things. And it talks about it in such a way that even though it was written thousands of years ago, it's just as practical today. Even with its practicality, it is very honest to the point of some people just don't like it. because of its honesty. You know, most of us like things to have like a little spin on it, like a nice little spin, a little polish. Ecclesiastes doesn't necessarily keep a spin or a rosy polish on it. It's sometimes it becomes brutally honest in its observations of life. So what we're going to do, I've got two translations here. I've got the one I normally use, which is the NRSV. But the one I'm going to use today comes out of a commentary by Norbert Lofink. He's passed away, but he wrote a commentary in German. It got translated into English, and
That's the spin on things.
that's the spin on things. So what I would like for us to do before we jump in, but I'm going to use Lofink's, and the reason I use it, one of the translations that we mostly hear, he kind of stops and says, let's go back to the Hebrew and let's really think about how it is. And I think it'll help us kind of get maybe a better picture of this wonderful book. But before we do, here's what I want you to do, okay? I want everybody to take a deep breath and just hold it in. Exhale. Now take one more. Now I want you to think that breath, that first breath or the second breath, whichever you held the longest, that's your life. In the scheme of things, the scheme of time and space, that's all that there is for your life. If you go with scientists who say the universe is so many billions of years old, your life is 15 seconds in comparison. 15 seconds in the scheme of things. When we read the beginning of Ecclesiastes, the words of Koheleth, translation teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Oftentimes Ecclesiastes, because of some of the terms here, whether it is Solomon or not Solomon, it is somebody who is wealthy and wise and who is offering advice to a new generation. So Ecclesiastes would have probably been used in some of the more formal educations of Israel. So whatever the Hebrew schools that would have existed during the time of post-exilic to the time of Jesus, Ecclesiastes would have been used as part of lessons. And so what I wanted to hear is an older person who is of means, who has lived, who's experienced, imparting wisdom on a newer generation. And for us, I think most of us that are a little older can see some of these things, and if you're older, you might can see it even more. I want somebody to read for me verse 2, your translation of verse 2.
Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless.
All right, who has a different translation?
Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
Okay. So, meaningless, vanity. Lofink goes back to the Hebrew, and instead of translating it vanity or meaningless, he looks at the words and he says it like this, because this is another way to translate it. A breath, a puff of breath. A breath, a puff of breath, Koheleth used to say. They are all a breath. So I want us to think, as we go through this, we can use the word meaningless. I don't think Koheleth is saying life is meaningless. I don't think Koheleth, the teacher, is saying that life is vain in the way that we think of vanity. But I do think that all of those include the Hebrew there of it is but a... And the Hebrew idea is that life exists only when we breathe. Go back to the Genesis story. When does man is created? What happens? God breathes life into him. And people knew that people died when what? They stopped breathing. So in between the first and the last breath, life occurs. But in the grand scheme of things, it's almost just like a puff of breath, a puff of breath. A puff of breath, a puff of breath, Koheleth used to say. They are all a breath. What does one draw from all the possessions from one labors under the sun? So these first few verses of chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, becomes the prologue and the question to which the teacher will begin to discuss for the rest of the course of the book. A puff of breath, a puff of breath. And we think about it, most things in our life are only what? Only here for a short time. And the question becomes, what does it profit one to draw from all the possessions of one's labor under the sun? Verses 4 through 11 offers us a big picture. So Koheleth begins kind of with the question, we might even say kind of an existential question. What's the purpose of all of this? What's the purpose of our labor? What's the purpose of all the things we have? Is there a reason for it? Because what? Everything is short. You know, think about when you were really, really young. I know. I remember when I was a kid, Christmas Day would happen, and December the 26th, it seemed like it would be an eternity till the next Christmas. And it felt like it. Now, I feel like I sneeze and it's Christmas again. You know, it's amazing how as you grow, time seems to go quicker, not shorter. And when you're young, you want it to go by what?
Slow.
Well, fast. And the older you get, the more you want it to go slow. So here, what I want us to know is our life is in between those two breaths, but what is going on outside of it? So this is what Koheleth begins to paint a picture. A generation passes, another comes, and the earth stays in eternity. So just think about, one generation comes, another generation goes, but guess what? Doesn't matter how many people come before you or after you, the earth's still going to spin. It's one of those things when you think of, about, I remember my sister being a teenager, and my dad would say, the universe doesn't stop for you. Most of us feel that way, don't we? It's all about, because this is all we can see. So Koheleth takes a large picture and says, a generation passes, another comes. The earth stays in eternity. The sun which rose and then set breathless, it races back to the place where it rises again. The earth does not consume breath like we do. It keeps moving. Southward blowing and turning to the north, turning, blows the air, and because it turns, the air returns. All the streams flow to the sea. The sea does not feel to the place whence the stream flow. They return to flow again. So he's describing the world as a never-ending, never-ceasing universe. So just imagine the idea is the rivers flow to the sea, but what? The sea never fills. And if you track it long enough, it always kind of comes back around. Just keeps coming. All things are constantly restless, more than humans can express. The eye is not sated by observing the ear. The eye is not sated by observing. The ear is not filled by hearing. It doesn't matter how much you see or how much you hear. There's always more. Whatever has occurred will occur again. What has been carried out, that will be carried out again. There is nothing new under the sun. So this refrain will come over and over again. think about every generation that comes along. They think they're the first generation to discover something, or to fight for something, or to rebel against something, or they come up with the idea. I love it when Lily will come home and think that she has heard the joke for the first time. Daddy, have you heard this joke? Yeah. And my dad heard it, and his dad probably heard it too. It's not new. But every generation has to, they're born with this emptiness, and it has to be rediscovered over and over again. Yet the earth itself, just keeps moving along. Moving along. At times something happens about which they say, observe that is new. But it's already occurred in the eternities that have gone before us. There is no memory of the former ones, and of the future ones still to come. There will also be no memory of them among those who come after them. The reality Koheleth paints the picture is that everything has its season, here. But as time passes, it is forgotten. I want you to think about, in all of human history, how many names do we remember?
At my age, not many.
I was asking our Monday Bible study group this past week, of the 12 disciples, how many can you name? And how many do you know anything about? They're pretty important, aren't they?
It's not about Peter, because I relate to it.
Yeah, but even the biblical narrative doesn't give us a whole bunch after Peter, John, Andrew. But we don't know a whole lot about them. Even the church didn't keep records of them. And we think about all of the people in human history, and a handful of people keep track of it. Historians and archaeologists. Most of us. Think about the presidents of the United States. How many can you recall and tell me something about them? We're not going to do it.
George Washington.
But if we were,
George Bush.
if we had to list them all, and then I had to ask you, they were president. You think they would be remembered?
Maybe 5 to 10.
Maybe 5 to 10.
How many were they? 48?
Yeah, there's a good many.
Been quite a bit.
Yeah. So even if you do something really, really big, it doesn't mean that you're going to be remembered. Think about all the statues that have been put up by people for thousands and thousands of years. How many are still up?
Well, they're taking a lot down lately.
Well, but I'm talking about in the ancient world. Of the pieces of art that have been painted, only a handful remain. Think about the labor that people have invested in something. You drive by an old farmhouse, it was handmade by the people that live there. Doesn't mean it's going to be around. So the question becomes, for us, what do we do with the short amount of time we have? And this is part of what Koheleth is. He gives us an idea that in the cosmology of God's created world that runs in order, an orderly place. Things have a place, they go into... Our lives are short. And the reality is, even in Koheleth's day, you could go somewhere and see the ruins of something and nobody has a memory of what that ruin is. We can look right out there into the graveyard, and unless your parents or grandparents are there, you're not going to know anybody that lived. And when we think about that, that helps put things into perspective in a way that we're not often comfortable with. You think about, can you name your great-great-grandparents? Do you know anything about them other than their name and where they came from? Do you know what they dreamed about, what they hoped for, what their fears were, what their anxieties were? What were their jobs? Most of us can't. And the same thing Koheleth is saying is going to happen to you. Now that may make us anxious, but it also should give us pause to say, when we worry about things that aren't necessarily important in the grand scheme of cosmology of God's world, it might give us permission to say, it's not as important as I think it is. Let's keep reading. I am Koheleth. I am the teacher. I was king over Jerusalem, of Israel in Jerusalem. And I had made up my mind to examine and to explore with the help of knowledge whether all that is carried out under the heavens is really a bad business in which humankind is forced to be involved at God's command. I observed all the actions that are carried out under the sun. The conclusion? All are a breath, an inspiration of air. What does your translation say of verse 14?
I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit.
Okay.
I've seen all the things that are done under the sun, and have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind.
Yeah. Another translation says, all is vanity and chasing after the wind. So this idea is all is like a breath, an inspiration of air, chasing after the wind. In the scheme of things, everything people chase after, you think about somebody that tries to chase after the wind. Can you catch it? Can you hold it? So the question becomes, in the things that we as humans pursue, is it something that's really attainable? This becomes a question. He says, with all of knowledge that he has in which humankind is forced to be involved at God's command. I applied my mind to seek and to search out wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. So why is this? I mean, we don't hear a lot of sermons that begin that way, do we? No. So let's keep reading, but keep some of these questions that we have for Koheleth. Why does he say these things? What is bent cannot be straightened. What is not there cannot be counted. I thought to myself as follows, look, I have increased and expanded my knowledge, so that now I have surpassed everyone who has ever ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have often been able to observe knowledge and perception. So I took upon myself to perceive what knowledge really is and to perceive what delusion and ignorance really are. I have perceived that this is a spirit of air. For much knowledge, much vexation. Deeper perception, deeper pain. I said to myself, go ahead, try being joyful, taste happiness. The conclusion, that too is breath. I want us to think about it for a moment. Who are the happiest people you know?
Children.
Children? I want you to think about when you were the happiest. And when I think of happy, when you didn't have any cares. It's probably childhood. In childhood, most of us might know that bad things happen, but we don't what? Or dwell on them. You fall asleep as a 4 or 5-year-old, you wake up in your bed. You can fall asleep anywhere. As an adult, you can't just fall asleep somewhere and think that you're going to end up in your bed. If you end up in a bed, it might be in a jail cell. If you just fall asleep places. You know, if you get sick and your mama says it's going to be all right, you just what? You trust that it's going to be all right. You don't second guess it. When something bad happens, they say it's going to be okay. You just go along, it's going to be okay. I've seen children who have been through stuff, even at a hospital or other places, they're okay. Now, not every kid that faces trauma can be okay, but some can. Because they know that at the end of the day, somebody else is looking after them and taking care of them. But there becomes a point in our lives where we start to lose that. And it's usually when we start to understand how the world really is. And this is what Koheleth is saying. The teacher is saying, the more I understand about the world, the more knowledge I have, the more wisdom I have, the more I realize it causes more suffering and vexation. It causes me to worry more. Think about when you've learned something that you didn't know, that you wish you didn't know. You can't unknow something. You know, the person that learns that their parents are Santa Claus. Sorry, anybody's wondering. You didn't know.
Oh,
You can't unknow that. You know, there are things you can't unknow. And Koheleth is looking and he realizes sometimes it might be better to not know. You might be happier. Some of the happiest people I know are people that aren't deep thinkers. They don't watch news, any news. They just, my grandmother was one. My grandmother, she was just happy all the time. Even in the nursing home, she was happy. But I loved her to this. She was not a deep thinker, and that was okay. That's who she was. She didn't question stuff. She just accepted it and went on. Me? I'll think something through it to death. And I'll stay up worrying about it and trying to just think about it. And some of it's stuff I can't even control. There's stuff on the other side of the world. What does it got to do with me? I might can think about it, but it doesn't mean right now, all of us on our cell phone have more information per minute, per second than Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, in our lifetime had. We have more up-to-date information than the President in the 1980s, late 1980s. And we get it faster and quicker. That's scary. Why should anybody, any of us, who aren't the President of the United States, who aren't in control of the Pentagon, have so much information about the world? Koheleth didn't have what we have, so the extremes of what we have make it even worse, I think. You know, to live in Edmond, South Carolina and know what's going on across the world can be a little bit what?
Scary.
Not only scary, it can weigh on you. Because you feel what? More helpless. So Koheleth says, the more I know about the world, the more I know I can't do anything about it. I feel that way sometimes, even in ministry. I said to myself, go ahead, try being joyful, taste happiness. The conclusion, it's a breath. It's quick, it doesn't last. I can't hold it. About laughter, I said, what nonsense. About joy, what good is it? He's probably exaggerating some here. It's for rhetorical style, but still. I drove myself to exploration in order to bathe my body in wine. And my mind kept leading me, my knowledge, to pasture in order to imprison ignorance until I might observe what kind of happiness humans can bring about under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I expanded my action. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I set out gardens and parks for myself. In them I planted all sorts of trees. I arranged overflowing ponds as to water the stands of sprouting trees. I bought male and female slaves, although I had already owned house slaves. I owned also a large number of animals and cattle and sheep and goats, more than all those who preceded me in Jerusalem. I collected silver and gold for myself as well, and my personal possession, kings and provinces. I procured singers, male and female, trained for me. And what a man desires, a large harem. I was already great, and I increased even more, so that I surpassed all those who preceded me in Jerusalem. Moreover, my knowledge remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not withhold them from me. I did not have to deny my heart any joy, for my heart could draw joy from all my possessions, and that was my portion out of all my possessions. So just think for a moment. Koheleth is saying, whether he actually did or this is just a thought experiment, listen, I recreated the world the way I wanted it. I planted what I wanted to plant. I rearranged the world the way I wanted it. And I filled my little kingdom with everything my heart desired. Literally. He didn't hold anything back. He wanted to see if maybe this would fulfill him. Anything he wanted, he took. I want us to think about for a moment, if you went and played whatever the lottery is there out there today, you just bought one ticket, and you found out you had all the money you thought you'd ever need. And you went and spent it on everything you thought you ever wanted. And you got it all. Would you be any better off? Now, most of us would say deep down, if we're honest, I'd like to try.
Yeah.
We probably just want more. That's,
Never have enough,
no.
never have, you know.
I had a friend that won that $1 million jackpot years ago. Within 5 years, she was broke and in worse shape because she went out there and, well, with her kids, she gave so much to the kids and so much
Yeah.
here, did all this stuff, and then went in debt because now you buy all this stuff, you still have to take care of it. You still have to pay taxes on it. You still have, and it just,
Yeah,
and she was more unhappy.
yeah,
She says, I wish I'd never bought that ticket.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you can watch most TV today and see the biography stories about the rich and the famous, and most of them at some point in their lives end up alone. Not all of them, but a lot do. And the question becomes, if those things can't make you fulfilled, what can? And this is what Koheleth thinks. If I can essentially stand in the place of God and rearrange my world the way I want it, and it all becomes about what? It becomes about me. It becomes about what I want, when I want it, how I want it, and it doesn't really matter how it affects other people, whether it's the slaves, the harem, whatever. They're there to serve what? My pleasure. Can you be satisfied? And I reflected on all the actions that my hands carried out and on the possessions that I had labored to possess. And the conclusion, they are all a breath, an inspiration of air. There is no profit under the sun.
Which verse are you on?
This is verse 11. Let me read it out of a different translation. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I'd spent in doing it. And again, all was vanity, and chasing after wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So even after doing all of this, he says, and he's telling the very thing everybody dreams about. If I could be king, if I could be the CEO, if I could be the boss, if I could be the person that won the lottery, if I could be the movie star, if I could be the Taylor Swift, if I could be that person, then I'd have it. So he gives us this experiment for us to think about, and the question becomes, it's like chasing after wind. Once you think you've got it all, you try to grab it and it floats away. It's like chasing wind. Are y'all okay to stay a few more minutes, or? Okay, you've got choir. Okay. They cut my time down, so it's...
I can listen. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. It's like, you'll be okay. You can do it in 45 minutes. I'm like, no. We'll go a little bit farther, and then we'll take a break. Verse 12, I reflected by observing what knowledge and what delusion and ignorance really are. Moreover, what kind of human will succeed the king whom they had early established? I observed, yes, a prophet comes from knowledge and not from ignorance, just as there is a prophet from light rather than darkness. And one who knows has eyes in his head, a fool walks in darkness. But I perceived me too, for one and the same fates await each one. So the idea is it's better to have wisdom than not. But it doesn't really, what is the profit of wisdom? The question is. Well, it's better to have light than darkness, but the same fate awaits each. So I thought to myself, the fate that awaits the fool also awaits me. And I said to myself, this too is a breath. For there is no eternal memory of a person who knows any more than for a fool. For in the day just ahead, both will be forgotten. So when you're dead, now we're going to look at Koheleth, and Koheleth is coming out of a period in Israel's history where there's not a whole lot of talk about afterlife. Okay, so we can go back and put in a different perspective. But Koheleth's perspective is when you die, he's not going to explain what happens, but here, in the world that exists after you die, whether you are the smartest man in the world or the fool, they're going to forget you. So the question becomes, what profit is there in spending all of your energy trying to come up with knowledge? Now, we might disagree with that because we can transmit knowledge from one generation to another generation a lot easier than Koheleth. Just because we have written, even print, it's better than what they had. Let's read just a few more verses and we'll end at the end of chapter 2. And also irksome to me were all my possessions for which I am laboring under the sun, and which I leave behind for some human who will come after me. Who perceives whether it will be the one who knows or the one who does not know? And yet someone will have power over all my possessions for which I labored under the sun and applied my knowledge. This too is a breath. And then I turned to despair concerning all my possessions for which I am laboring under the sun. For it happens that my possessions which one person has accumulated through knowledge and perception and skill must be handed over as the portion of another person who has not labored for it. And this too is a breath and a reoccurring evil. So Koheleth says, out of my wisdom, out of my knowledge, I've gained and accumulated all that I have. So part of it is here, the knowledge, and part of it is the stuff. And when I die, this is lost automatically. But the stuff I have, it's going to somebody else. And they didn't work for it. They didn't labor for it. Are they going to use it for good or bad? And this is a problem everybody has. When you die, all the things you've accumulated in your house is going to be someone else's problem. The things you think they're going to love, they're going to throw away.
4 truckloads of it.
Yeah.
Dumpster outside.
Your treasures are they going to be there? Or they're going to auction it off, or they're going to sell it. My dad, when they moved to Texas, he had inherited this old piano that's over 120 years old. And he wanted me and Amber to put it in our house. I don't even know if it played. It looked horrible. Like a piece of trash. I hope you're not watching this.
You got it on.
I was like, Pop, we got enough junk. Your great-grandmother had it. She died. It's just been sitting in storage. I don't want it. There's stuff in my house that Lou is not going to want, and that's okay. What then does a person get out of all of one's possessions and by weaving plans in one's mind, in all one's labor under the sun? Day after day, business consists only of pains and vexation, and even at night, one's mind is not at rest. One of the things I've learned, the more you have, the more you worry about it. And the more you worry about it, the less rest you get. The thing that you thought was going to help you be more at peace causes you what?
More stress.
More restlessness. That's strange, ain't it? Jesus tells a parable very similar to this about the rich man who had everything in his barn, decides he needs to build a bigger barn. fills it up, tells itself, rest now. And then he dies. The reality is he had more than enough. But can you have more than enough? I don't know.
We forget to enjoy life.
Yeah. The happy disposition whereby one can eat and drink and come to perceive happiness in one's possessions is not given in human nature. My observation has been rather that it comes from the hand of God. For who, if not I, has something to eat or is able to enjoy? Now there are humans who are blessed in the eyes of God. They are the ones to whom He has given knowledge and perception and joy. And there are those whose life has failed. They are the ones whom He has commanded to be involved in the business of increasing and collecting, and then of giving it to the one who is blessed in the eyes of God. And that too is a breath and an inspiration of air. So He's given us a question at the beginning, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In verses 1 through 11 of chapter 1, he gives us the big cosmology of His world, where everything's in order, it happens, and we're just a little breath in the larger scheme of things. And then chapter 1, verses 12 through 3:15, or a little farther actually, to the end of, even 3:15, he describes what it's like to live as a human in this world, the anthropology. So it goes from cosmology to anthropology. And in that anthropology, the reality is all of us are living, whether we are a farmer or a king, we're living to have and to gain in knowledge. The same fate awaits both the rich and the poor, the wise and the fool, and that's death. There are some people who have everything and can be happy. There are some people that can have everything and be miserable. The same will be true of the poor person. There are some people that can have the best meal in the world and not enjoy it. There are some people that can enjoy what they have, and it's not necessarily anything to be right home about. So what I want you to do is to read chapters 3 and 4, and maybe chapter 5 this week. And you'll notice that the most famous passage out of Ecclesiastes comes next in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. They've written songs about it. Was it the Mamas and the Papas?
Yeah.
Everything has its place. So I want you to read that, and I want you to understand in the scheme of things. So there's it begins, there's a time to be born and a time to die. And in reality, it begins there, a time to be born and a time to die, and all of the rest that is listed there happens in between. And every person that lives long enough is going to experience the big range of all of it. There's nobody that lives without ever crying. There's very few people that live without ever celebrating. And life is lived in those extremes. Every day, your life is lived from the moment you breathe your first breath to the moment you breathe your last breath. And nobody gets away from those two things. So how do we live in these different seasons of life? Because this is a universal picture of life. A lot of times at funerals, I'll remind people that we all lived. Doesn't matter if you live 10 years or 100 years. You're going to live in those extremes in one way or another. Now the question we have as 21st century followers of Jesus, how do we live in that life too, differently? And we'll talk some about that as we go next week. Following that, you'll see some social critiques in chapter 3, verses 16 through 6:10. You'll see religion. He's going to point his finger at the religious folk that are too religious, the people that threw out different things. So we'll look through these as we go along, and we'll get through Ecclesiastes by the time we're through. Next week we'll try to start right at 6:15. I won't guarantee it, but if we don't, it's okay. Yeah. Let me close this in a word of prayer, and if y'all have questions, comments, we'll stick around and talk about those. Holy God, we thank you. God, we thank you for the book of Ecclesiastes. God, we thank you for sometimes the sober reminder that life is short. Most people, whether it's even if they know it's their last day, can't picture that there won't be another sunrise or another meal, another hug or another kiss. And that's probably a blessing. But each of us only have a finite amount of time. Lord, help us through this study to learn what is most valuable and worthy of our time. Help us to center ourselves on you and the people you've put in our lives to love and to care for. And help us each to find ways, even during the difficult seasons, to find joy and happiness and contentment. And God, when the seasons are great, Lord, help us just to enjoy them, because we know another season's on its way. Lord, be with us, guide us, bring us back together, and in everything we do, may we give you glory. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.